Hi, I wanted to make one final video before the weekend's over about education, the importance of education in relation to being a man going his own way. And it is a very important issue. And I'm going to speak from personal experience and try to add my perspective to something. And in particular, not exclusively, this is addressed to, well, young MRAs, let's say 25 and younger, or men going their own way. People who've caught on a lot earlier. I wish I had caught on earlier, but you know, the ship has sailed for me, and in particular because the ship has sailed for me, I think I can add some insight to the education issue in relation to men going their own way. Well, one thing that one needs to disavow is this notion that any education will do. Unfortunately, education is something that's rather ill-defined and rather nebulous and quite abstract, but people seem to have some common consensus on what it is. The simple fact is that education needs to give you something in real terms. When I was growing up and when I went to university in the mid-90s, there was still the ruling notion, before the economic crisis, of course, that any education would do. And I enjoyed what I studied for the most part. My bachelor degree was in German and classics, i.e. Latin, ancient classical literature, Latin, Greek, as well as languages. It certainly didn't lead anywhere in terms of employment, but I sort of bought into the propaganda back then. But being a young man, which I'm not, but being a young man and having the opportunity to study, to get a real education, I would strongly suggest studying something technical, and barring that, something that you know there is market demand for. And in particular, market demand that will not recede given an oppressive economic environment or situation. So, for example, engineering. I think it's really fantastic that Barbarossa, I don't know if it was his by design and intent, decided to study engineering. Plenty of men who enjoy it for its own sake, but even if you don't enjoy it and you have some talent and you can grit your teeth and bear it, I would suggest you just go for it and get it done. The reason simply being, whether it's engineering or I suppose trying to think of some other computer science. Those in particular, those kinds of jobs, strong engineering, computer science, for example, those fields, they also give you a lot of flexibility and mobility. That means you're not grounded to the country you're stuck in, that you grew up in. You could leave, for example. There are plenty of engineering jobs offered abroad, as well as jobs in computer science, information science, things like that. But one thing you don't want to do if you decide to spend the money and invest the time and energy in education is essentially waste it studying humanities and social sciences. And this is someone who kind of enjoys that stuff, but you can always just do some weekend reading on that stuff, and it'll be a lot cheaper and probably more enjoyable than having some university professor dictate to you what he thinks. So education is important, but it's very clear. We need to be clear about what an education can be used for. And if you want to be truly independent, you need, unfortunately, for better or worse, to be an economic asset. So if you're in a position to be that asset, and only your performance matters, and political bias and all these other things won't affect you, the best way to do that is to be involved in some sort of technical field and be reasonably proficient in it. It took me a long time to realize this lesson, and only my last master's degree was reasonably utilitarian. I'm still benefiting in some ways from it, and in the future, and hope to benefit from it more so. But I think if I could go back in time, and I had the talent and the aptitude, and those are debatable, I probably would have gone along studying something technical. But this is very important because if you don't study these things, you could well likely end up with empty hands and with no market availability as in terms of employment, and that's not a good thing. Particularly if you want to go your own way. If you want to go your own way, you have to strive for some kind of independence, particularly financial independence, and those technical fields in particular are the best ways to go about it. No one's forcing you to do that, but that would be my suggestion. Because it happens too frequently that people study things in university that aren't really, I don't like using the term necessary, but economically viable. And no, studying finance, in my opinion, generally speaking, is not economically viable. Things that are really recession-proof, technical fields in particular, in fact, I think that's the only thing that's recession-proof, are really the things to be studied, in my opinion. Moreover, you might not go into university beyond. If you're not going to go to university to study those things, I wouldn't even bother going to university. Learn a trade, become a plumber, become a carpenter. These things are also constantly in need. Become an auto mechanic. There's a plethora of fields and areas that don't involve university education that are essentially requirements, the services of which are always required by people. Beyond getting special training as an engineer, as a computer scientist, as a some other technical profession, going to university is more or less a waste of time and money. There's no need to go to university to read about medieval history. You can always pick up a book about that. There are plenty of books. If you're interested in languages, like I used to be when I was young, you could always just take a language course at a private institution. So there's no pressing reason to really study any of these things. One thing fairly easy to say is it's probably difficult to study engineering on your own. I'm sure it's possible, but so that's one reason why you might have a university education. But certainly don't need one. And like I said, carpentry, mechanics, plumbing, there's so many things that are really required services in this society that will allow you to be more or less independent. And you don't need a university education for it, and you'll be better off for it. Education is quite frankly overrated, at least in the traditional sense. And whatever you end up doing with your life, the important thing is to do something that will eventually lead to you being economically viable. Not to necessarily, certainly not to participate in the rat race, but to allow yourself to survive in a comfortable fashion and pursue your own goals and do your own thing without having to worry about issues of employment, finding a job, and things like that. Ideally, the job should come to you, or you should come to the job through a wide selection of choices available to you. And that generally can only be achieved if you have the qualifications, whatever they might be, as a plumber or an auto mechanic or a chemical engineer, to do so. For me, the ship has sailed on that issue, and so I try to make do with what education I have received and what I do have in terms of degrees. I think it's been a long thought process. I think a while back I lived in Asia. I think it's quite likely by the end of this year I might be moving back to Asia in a long-term capacity, for the simple reasons that I can make much better money there. No other reason, really. I don't find much of value in the society I live in currently, and in a way, it almost suits being a man going his own way, because you're a complete outcast in most Asian cultures anyway. So, kind of fits the lifestyle, I suppose. But more importantly, I can make better money there and have a better lifestyle than I do now. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I don't know if that's definite, but given the limitations, my educational limitations, and what I've pursued when I was younger, that's probably the best choice for me. And these are just ideas and suggestions. I think ultimately every man going his own way needs to make a choice about these things. But it certainly is helpful to be able to command strong marketability in a field that really is recession proof, that allows you to be independent. Um, and I mean, engineering is always the first thing that comes to mind. I've never heard of a surplus of engineers, although strangely enough, I heard of a surplus of computer science. And that sort of seemed to even itself out at the end of the day. But there's a lot of junk in academia that's not worth studying in a university environment. I'd say 90% of it is the case, and you'd be best off not pursuing it at all. Rather, pursue something practical with application. You'll be happier for it. Like I said, if I could go back in time, I'd do things differently. But I thought maybe I can add some insight for someone who's a bit older, who made what I can safely say in retrospect are educational mistakes, and to some extent has paid the price and probably will do so for the rest of his life. I mean, it's whatever people might say. I'm tired myself. I'm tired of studying. I'm not going to be going back to university anytime soon, and so I'm not going to randomly pursue some engineering degree without the background. But for the younger people, younger men, I suggest you do something along those lines, or like I say, become a carpenter. Become something that that gives you some decent money that really is required. That's probably the most important thing. What you don't want to do, to say it quite bluntly, is finish university with a fucking English degree. At least I studied foreign languages, so having done so gave me some background, which eventually led to translation eventually. But if all you do is get an English degree, it's pretty useless. And so you should be aware of these things if you're young. And I know there are plenty of men going their own way who are my age or older. But I would suspect they might agree with me on this, that education needs to be a useful tool, and going to university to study to read for an English degree or something like that simply isn't very useful. And the mobility factor can be important. One reason why I think it's important to be mobile in terms of the labor market is most Western countries have draconian taxes, which means you don't keep a whole lot of what you earn. That's one example. Let's say if you have a good engineering degree and you get a job offer in, I don't know, Singapore or someplace else, your earning potential will generally be much better, or Dubai, because you're going to be paying a lot less taxes. You're also not going to be burdened by a lot of Western women trying to drain the money from your coffers. That's like a fringe benefit, I guess. But anyway, these are just some random thoughts I have on the issue. Be practical in your decisions, whether it's apprenticeship training for some sort of practical trade, learning a trade, which is equally valid, or university education for something that's very complicated like chemical or mechanical engineering. Uh, you know, think practically. If you still have the opportunity, you're young enough, you have the funds. Otherwise, my suggestion is be as practical as you can, given what you do have. If you are older, that's what I've been trying to do, and hopefully it'll work out. Like I said, probably going to be moving back to Asia at some point in time in the not too distant future. There's not much for me here in Germany. I've lived here before, and I certainly can't save money, and I don't really have a social network anywhere, so that doesn't really matter. So yeah, got to make do with what you have, but if you can, learn something practical, study something practical if you have the opportunity to go to university. Don't waste it studying social sciences or humanities. I think you'll benefit from it a lot more. You'll be thankful at the end of the day, basically, and you won't have too much regret, I think. You can always study these things in your free time, weekends, what have you. hell, you can have internet discussions about it. You don't need to go to university to study medieval history, as I said, or anything along, or even classics for that matter. So anyway, this is some random thoughts, but something important to note, I think.